Brian, you may begin.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the U.S. Commercial Service, the Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York District Export Councils, we welcome all of you to the third of four Trade Talk Tuesday discussions on Manufacturing Month. Today's topic, the AES filing process. My name is Brian Beams. I am a Senior International Trade Specialist with the U.S. Commercial Service. I am your host for today's session. Joining us is my colleague, Anthony Sargis, who resides in the Commercial Service Office in Connecticut. And today's guest speaker, Jose Brentes, Senior Manager of Global Trade Compliance for OFS Fattel. Jose is also the the chair of the Connecticut District Export Council. Before we begin, just a couple housekeeping notes. Today's presentation is being recorded. If you disagree, please disconnect at this time. Everyone is on listen mode throughout the presentation. We will open the microphones up for everyone to ask once we get to the Q&A portion. You can also at any time type in your question by using the Q&A feature. After the month of programs is complete, all attendees will receive a survey from the U.S. Commercial Service. Please complete this short request. It does help us develop future education and informative programming for you, the U.S. exporter. Anthony will be sending a summary email of today's session by tomorrow morning with additional resources, so don't worry about that. Lastly, the views and opinions expressed in today's presentation may not reflect the official policy or position of the U.S. government. Next slide. Here is the final, one more slide, there we go. Here is the final session, which is next week. It will be a global logistics update. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to Jose. Sir?
Thank you very much, Brian. For those of you that joined us in the previous sessions, these can go pretty fast in speed in data. Information it's like drinking from a fire hose. So appreciate you staying with us and keeping up with us. Feel free to ask any questions. We'll try to address them at the end or following up afterwards with any longer questions, things that we need to get back to you on. And so with that, let's just jump right on it. What's the EEI? The EEI is the data that must be filed through the Automated Export System, AES. Stands for Electronic Export Information. Some of the people that have been doing this for a while still may call it SED, which was the Shipper Export Declaration, which used to be done on a paper form, and now that is electronic. We call it EEI, same concept. The filing includes information about the sender and the receiver of the goods and about the goods that are being exported. So the Census Bureau uses these filings to calculate U.S. trade statistics, and U.S. Customs Border Protection and the Bureau of Industry Security use the data to help ensure compliance with U.S. export regulations like licensing, ECCNs, and so forth. So does your shipment require an EEI filing? And that's something that you need to ask every time you are shipping outside of continental U.S. So you must file the EEI for shipments from the U.S. to foreign destinations, to any country outside the U.S. Between the U.S. and Puerto Rico. So even though Puerto Rico is part of the U.S., EEI is required. And from the U.S. to the Virgin Islands. So those two territories require EEI filing. So if your shipment includes also under the same Schedule B or harmonized tariff number valued at $2,500 per HTS. So if your shipment is over $2,500 per combined HTS, then you are required to file EEI. If your shipment has an export license or an export permit license exemption, you are required to file an EEI. If your product is subject to the ITAR, you are also required to file an EEI. and subject to any commodity end use and user destination requirements that we'll go over for specific countries. So what shipments are exempt? You won't need to file an EEI from the US to Canada unless the merchandise is subject to ITAR, requires a license, or includes rough diamonds, or is the merchandise is just in transit to Canada. And we'll go over the Canadian exemption. From the US to other US territories, American Samoa, Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, Guam, Howland Islands, Wake Island, no EEI is required to those US territories, but you are required for the two that we had mentioned before. So this is one most commonly used EEI filing exemption. For shipments to Canada, you always need an EEI. So either you have an EEI or you have a filing exemption that authorizes you not to file. For Canada, you put no EEI 30.36. Unless, of course, as we mentioned, the product is ITAR or requires an export license. The other filing exemption that you use very commonly is no EEI 30.37A for low value. This is for shipments when the value is at $2,500 or less per HTS. And that this can be confusing. So let me make it clear here. So in this example, how to use, you have a jumper, a cable, 854470, have 3 line items. One is worth 1,500, one is worth 300, one is worth 300. Okay, the total for that shipment is $2,100. So there'll be, you'd use the no EEI 30.37, low value. Easy enough. Now, if that same shipment, the 3 line items were 1,500, 1,300, the total value of that shipment of the combined HTSs was $2,800, a AES EEI filing would be required. Now, if you have 3 separate items and 2 of them have the same HTS, but one of them has a third HTS, now you would add the first HTS, 854470, you have 2,300, and then the second one is only worth $800. So even though your shipment is $3,100, no combined HTS code is over 2,500, so you could use the no EEI 30.37 low value exemption. Okay, so hopefully this can kind of clarify the combined HTS rule. Effective September 27, 2020, the rules were expanded, the AEI filing rules for shipments destined to China, which includes Hong Kong, Russia, or Venezuela. So any product that, anytime you're shipping to these countries, an item that has an ECCN, you are required to file an EEI independently of the value of that shipment. So an EEI is required for shipments to China, Russia, or Venezuela for all shipments that are more than $2,500, right? Even if export licenses are required. A shipment, regardless of the value content that is intended for a military end use. So if the product is intended for military use, does not matter the value. You are mandated to file an EEI, and the shipments of all ECC, if it has a Commerce Control List item, a ECCN, then you are required to file. If it's EAR 99, then you follow the same low value rules, even for China, Russia, and Venezuela. So who can do the EEI filing? The U.S. principal party of interest is typically the U.S. exporter or their authorized agent, so a freight forwarder who has been issued a power of attorney. But you, the company, the exporter, is the U.S. PPI, and there's some responsibilities that comes with that. A U.S. agent of a foreign principal party of interest, FPPI, can do the filing if they're acting on behalf of the exporter. The address for the EEI filing is the address where the goods start their journey to the port of export. So if you are shipping from Connecticut to Miami, and then they're filing the EEI there, the goods are being exported from Connecticut on the EEI, not from Miami. So we need to identify the manufacturing address there. The exporter is liable for the accuracy in filing, even if the filing is assigned to another party. So you cannot blame your freight forwarder for incorrect filing, because it's your responsibility to do it and to have to make sure it's done properly. Therefore, even when you have a freight forwarder, it's recommended that you will request proof of filing, and often that you review the records to make sure that information is being filed properly, because you are the US PPI. So just clarifying some of the terms, ACE is the automated commercial environment, is a system through which the trade community reports import and exports, and the government determines admissibility. You need an ACE account to run import reports, but also to file EEI. You'd go in ACE, you go to the automated export system, with the system where exports use to electronically declare their international exports to the Census Bureau. The EEI is the actual form, the application, the electronic export information is the data that is submitted to U.S. Customs and Border Protection through the AES census. You also get an ITN number, and that is the internal transaction number. When you submit the EEI to the AES, the server notifies you that your application has been successfully submitted, and you get an email and this ITN number that you would put in on your every bill, export documents, and so forth. Okay, so how to file. You may file your electronic export information for your export transactions by accessing directly the ACE secure data portal located in the customs website. If you have a third party doing it, for right now, you may not have access, but it's fairly easy to get it. First time users will need to request, trade compliance or someone to create an account and to obtain a username and a password prior to filing and to having access. First time users typically is recommended that to review the video series on AES Direct System prior to their first filing. There's a lot of good videos, information that we'll send it out to you guys to review. So when to file? In most cases, the filing must be done from 1 to 24 hours prior to the actual export of the shipment, depending on the method of transportation. Shorter times are allowed for express shipments, 72-hour requirement for vehicles. So you got to make sure that you will give yourself time to file the AES EEI in a timely manner before the shipment leaves. Typically, you don't file after unless you have a special authorization. When we're talking about EEI, this bad word comes often. It's a routed export transaction, which occurs when a foreign purchaser or a foreign principal party of interest requests to have their merchandise delivered to another location in the U.S., and then the merchandise is retrieved by a freight forwarder or another agent who has been contracted by the purchaser to actual export. When you file the EEI, we'll ask you if this is a routed transaction or not. Issue with that a lot of times is you don't know when. So shipment may leave today from Connecticut or to go to Miami, and then it may sit in Miami for a month waiting for other products to be consolidated and then shipping out. Well, you have filed already the EEI, so it's important to have that information. When you have other parties file on a routed transaction, there are some documentation that is required for you to have if the FVPI is the one that will be filing that. So make sure that you understand who is going to be responsible for filing that. So FVPI can file when they are physically present in the US at time of the export. So if they have a sister company, so if they have an entity in the US, the freight forwarder typically would not be count as the FPPI. Mentioned earlier, freight forwarder can file on your behalf if they are a party to the transaction. So you cannot have a freight forwarder that is not a party to the transaction file the EEI for you. They must have a valid export power of attorney, letter authorization. You should probably complete a SLI, shipper's letter of instruction, with all the information that they need to file the EEI. And then again, best practice to make sure that they get back to you with the ITN number, proof of filing, to make sure that they are filing. Something else to be noteworthy on this is AES downtime policy. There's sometimes where the system's down and you have to export an item and you cannot file the EEI. There's a downtime policy, but you cannot invoke the AES downtime policy unless you receive an official notice that the system is down. If you have not received a notice and the filing is required, then you cannot ship. If you use the AES downtime policy for an export, you need to contact the port from which you'll be exporting. Instead of a AES proof of filing citation, you may use AES downtime citation with just AES down as an exemption with your individual company filer ID and following date. But then you have to file for any export that went out with the downtime policy citation. As soon as the system is back online, you must file. Corrections. You have a maximum of 4 days from the date of acceptance to make any corrections. However, the regulations do require you to report any changes immediately once they are known. Could be the wrong ECCN, they calculated the weight was wrong, changes in the user addresses, anything like that. You have 4 days to change your initial filing. And why that is important is because until a few years ago, there was no penalties. There are clearly fines and penalties now for AES EEI filing. We're talking about $1,100 per day for late filing, or $10,000 for inaccurate or non-filing. So you have inaccurate information and it's found, or you have not filed. You or your freight forwarder have not filed, then it's going to be $10,000 per violation, per export where you failed to file an EEI. Again, going back to that, if you have a third party, you better make sure that they're filing it, because those $10,000 per export are going to add up really quickly. And then record keeping. The USPPI, so you are responsible for record keeping. Records must be retained for a period of 5 years from the date of export. So you should probably keep the authorization to file for the for if it's a freight forwarder. Details for filing provided by the USPPI. So like the copy of the SLI, copy of the filing. It generates a PDF right away, so there's no reason for you not to have it. And should you supply a shipper with the details of filing, not just the ITN, but a copy of the export bill of lading, should documents that you should keep with your AES filing. Again, a lot of companies say, well, I don't file, the freight forwarder does that, and he keeps all the records. There's a fire at the freight forwarder's warehouse, and he loses the data. It's not his problem. Ultimately, it's your problem as a USPPI to have all the records. So I think I'm proud of myself. I went through it in 20 minutes. let's see if we have any questions.
Thank you, Jose. We appreciate that. Um, for I- oh, sorry for sharing your knowledge, time, and experience. At this time, if you have a question, feel welcome to write it in or open your mic and announce yourself. Get back on video.
Jose, just one question that I think came in the chat box, and I think it's accurate. So when you're reporting the Schedule B in AES, correct? Not just an NHS code for a foreign country, or is there a difference? Are you just reporting the Schedule B?
So typically, when you are reporting on the EEI, you are reporting the Schedule B. However, they have been merging the two more and more, and so the EEI actually now accepts HTS codes, which are typically more complete and more detailed than the Schedule B. So for the most part, for me, rather than maintaining two sets of books that I keep my HTS codes and my Schedule Bs, I now only use the HTS codes on all my AES filings. Unless there's one that has not been merged yet and there's an error, for the most part, I will use my HTS codes.
Thanks, Jose. And I know that you covered a lot, and I had a couple questions written down, and you covered them well. The other question is, how often are you reviewing those codes for your company to make sure there's accuracy? Are you doing it like once a year, twice a year? How often are
So
you doing it?
at least once a year. So every year, the US government, and this happens around December, January, February timeline, they will make some codes obsolete and they'll come up with new codes. That is the perfect timing for you to first review, does any of the codes that have become obsolete, any of my codes that I use on my day to day has become obsolete? And often they also say, okay, this is one code that we break it down into 5 codes or 3 codes, or we had 3 codes before and we bring it down to 1 code only. So there's going to be looking at anything that changed and then reclassify and look at anything that's new, and they may have changed, right? So that is prompts you to do it as far as the HTS codes. Then on the regular basis, it's valuable to kind of go and look and see what if you have anything funny that doesn't fit your material that kind of somehow sneaked in. Uh, my company, only codes that I previously approved are allowed in SAP or JD Edwards system, although some companies just do a mass upload of all HTS codes. They just, or Schedule B, they just grab the whole book and upload the whole book. The issue that leaves is that someone, may just drag and drop the wrong code and pick something that's completely not applicable. I had one engineer that picked one code that he thought it was his code, and then he used that code for everything. No matter if it was electronic components, bananas, or cars, you would have always bring that one code. So make sure that you do that. Also train your engineers. You understand who classifies, who assigns the HTS codes in your company. Make sure that they are qualified to do that as well.
Thanks, Jose. And I guess one other question on identifying codes and doing the search. If you're struggling with that, who have you relied on to assist you with that? I know the U.S. Census has a 1-800 number, Schedule B. You can go through the search on their website. Have you found that helpful if you needed more advice from Census directly?
I haven't done that myself. One tool that I use a lot. So uh, on the custom side, I think there's the help tools are a lot more robust on with the U.S. Customs on the HTS codes that they are on the Schedule B. I use one website a lot called Cross Rulings. So if you just type Cross Rulings, where any ruling that has ever been given by U.S. Customs on how to classify a product is listed there. It's publicly knowledge. So you can go to Cross Rulings and I can say optical fiber, and I can see other rulings, how and review the technical information. Oh, this is similar to my product, to what I have. And then there's a proposed or HTS code that they give me. Then I go to use that code and go to the HTS book, the nomenclature, and I'll be able to see, okay, yeah, this is still valid and is correct, and I validate that. So the cross rulings for me is still the tool that I use the most.
And Jose, that's with the U.S. Customs and Border Protection?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to pop that into the chat for folks.
Jose, question that did come in, for the HTS or Schedule B, can you have items with the same Schedule B, but different country of origin, and they are treated separately, not combined when reviewing for low value exemption?
So the country of origin will not impact the calculations for the EEI, right? So you can have them in a separate line item. If it's the same HTS code, then you need to add them all up, even if it's a different country of origin. Country of origin does not come into play in calculating the value for EAI. Even if it's not a U.S. product, you need to file an EEI. I'm not sure if it helped out, if I fully
If
answered.
that doesn't answer your question out there, please send us a note separately and we'll see what we can to address that question. Brian, just one thing I want to mention before we obviously move on from today. We're a minute or two away from closing today's program, but because I think this was, we all thought this was fairly successful, got a lot of good emails from folks out there regarding the 20-minute snapshots with some Q&A. We're going to extend the Trade Talk Tuesday through November, and we're going to cover some various export finance related topics, some of them that might be of interest to you. We're going to do duty drawback, foreign exchange, managing payment risk, IC disc, and export credit insurance. And there's 5 Tuesdays in November. So if you have any other ideas for sessions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. But we're going to circle our conversation next month around, different export finance mechanisms. And we'll send an email out hopefully by the end of the week with what we're planning on doing. And again, these are all obviously optional sessions. Today might be helpful to you, and then the commercial invoices may have not one that you wanted to participate in. So they're all kind of a la carte. But once you register for one, you'll get the information on all of them. And I think we have one final question here, Jose. Do freight forwarders usually do a good job at filing correctly and not getting their customers, U.S. companies, manufacturers in trouble?
The answer is garbage in, garbage out. I feel like the freight forwarders do a good job. I think companies do a poorly job providing the freight forwarder with all the information that they need to file the EEI. So as an exporter, you need to be familiar with every data field that the freight forwarder would need to require the EEI, to make sure that either through an SLI, that you are giving them all the relevant information so then they can file the EEI. Otherwise, are they just making stuff up? Are they just assuming things? So you need to make sure that you are familiar with the forms, with the fields that they need, and that you provide each element to your freight forwarder. Once they have that, I believe that for the most part they are, but I would also make sure that you request once in a while to see a full filing to make sure they are doing a good job. So trust but audit.
Thank you, Josie. Brian, I think that concludes today's presentation. Anything else?
That's everything on my side. I appreciate everyone at this time. Please do join us next week for an update on